We now move on to a fireside chat, the title of which is Reimagining Customer Experience Strategy, Shift in Consumer Behavior, Pre, During, and Post-COVID-19. And I'd first like to welcome and introduce the members of this fireside chat. Puneet Kapoor, President, Products, Alternate Channels and Customer Experience Delivery, Kotak Mahindra Bank. And Vinod, Kannan, Chief Commercial Officer, Vistara, TATA SIA Airlines. This chat will be chaired and moderated by Anupam Jalote, CEO, International Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology. Anupam, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ivan. Very warm welcome, Puneet, Vinod.
Good afternoon.
Lovely having some such stalwarts from the service industry here with us. I had spent a lot of time in another industry, telecom, another service industry. So between the three of us, we have a very interesting mix of somebody who has people's money in their safe, somebody who has people's lives in their hands, and somebody who makes sure that people can talk to each other. And now I help people with innovation. And I'm thinking that customer experience actually has two facets to it. One part is your genuine desire to give a certain level of service and experience to your customers. And then the second part is the channels through which you deliver it. And those channels would include your people, the training of your people, the technology behind it, whether it's online, whether it's offline. Now, with that background, you visualize that there is a certain amount of inefficiency in every system that you design. So when you're visualizing a system, when you're visualizing your customer experience, you're really keeping the customer at the center of everything. And then you're hoping that she or he will have the best possible experience that you can give, because that's how you distinguish yourself from customers. That's how you build up trust and loyalty, which are the lifebloods of our business. And then it's up to the chain, the delivery mechanism to deliver. And now COVID hit us. So there were some trends which were already accelerating, that the world was shrinking into the smartphone. Or was it really? You know, I always get confused on that. Some things can't fit into a smartphone. An aeroplane cannot, a bank cannot. But anyways, the trend was that people preferred to do things on their time, at their convenience, when they wanted it, how they wanted it. That was something that the world was asking for. And then during this COVID times, it became a compulsion, a need. And now you, as the custodians of the customer experience, as the guides, the creators of that experience, you've been faced with a certain set of challenges, because you would want to go omni-channel, you would want to go more and more online. And does that sometimes conflict with your own desire to give that high level of service that you want? Because we're all kind of old school here, because we're human beings, flesh and blood. And at some point in time, the convenience of the e-media is good, is wonderful, but you want a bit more. In the banking, it's very, very different. In airlines, it's very, very different. So, Puneet, I'd like to start with you and hear from you your views on this conflict first. You know, the desire to give a certain experience, the understanding that customers might want a certain experience a certain way, and then how you designed it, created it. So your organizational philosophy for experience, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Anupam, for the question. Happy to be here and being in this conversation. You know, a popular answer to your question is digital first. Yeah. But as you also said, what you have to bear in mind is what the customer wants. And that really brings out the fact that you have to create your capabilities and processes and experience delivery around the channel of choice that the customer is either overtly telling you or subtly telling you basis his behavior, and the behavior has to be read. Number one. Number two, customers come to you for a variety of things. Yeah. And you could probably cluster them into 3 I's, standing for information, instruction, and issues. The entire platform and the service philosophy actually covers these 3 I's in terms of how efficiently you are able to address these 3 needs, how frictionless you are able to address these 3 needs, how accurately and promptly you are able to address these 3 needs. And there is a constant, and so the philosophy also entails taking a constant reverse feedback from the customer, which, for example, in our organization, we do through the medium of NPS, Net Promoter Score. It's almost a religion and a DNA for us now. We do periodic feedback surveys with our customers, and every VOC received and the trends understood are taken back, evaluated, and reprocessed for any kind of enhancements, corrections that we need to do.
Okay. So that kind of is the broad framework of how you let the customer sort of guide you towards the primacy of the channel. And you saw those trends change during COVID? You saw behavioral patterns shift? I mean, some parts are obvious, but still there would be...
If in, one of the views which one keeps reading is that as digital becomes more prominent and more efficient, the need for voice-based interaction will probably reduce. But in the post-COVID phase, what we actually found was customers' anxiety to probably connect with you on voice was even more. And it was obviously led by a variety of factors. It was not just environment-related, cue, but there was a need for reassurance. There was a need for wanting to know how to be able to do things differently, given that physical accessibility was now constrained. And we found, that our daily call volumes on the phone banking platforms didn't really dip much. If at all, for certain needs, they actually went up, especially linked to the moratorium related stuff. We saw that the call volumes really going up because customers wanted clarity, understanding, etc.
Very, very, very interesting insight there. Vinod, if we switch to you and first share your own views on the overall sort of experience that you want to design, and then to touch upon this experience change, shift in requirements from customers, how would you call it?
Right. Thank you, Anupam, and thanks, ET, for having me. I think you talked about telco, you talked about the banks, and you talked about airlines, 3 different industries. I have the distinct pleasure of being the only one which you can't do digitally completely. So you can book a ticket on the website, you can check in through your mobile phone, but you can't get from Delhi to Bombay on your smartphone. You still have to physically be there. So that has positives and negatives. I mean, it's an opportunity, great opportunity for me, because the product I sell, you still have that need for a face-to-face interaction, right? So that gives me an opportunity for me to display some of the customer service that I have. It's also, I would say, not a negative, but it's also a challenge, because given in this world where people are not communicating as much face-to-face, the customer has a much higher elevated expectation when there's a face-to-face kind of interaction. So that's also a challenge which we're trying to manage. Now, the fact remains that at Vistara, at least, we keep the customer at the center of everything we do. I mean, it's easier said than done. I mean, every organization strives to do this. But I think I just want to highlight some examples of how this is done, at least at Vistara. So one, of course, like what was also mentioned by Puneet, we also have a Net Promoter Score system. We listen to the customer. And in fact, after every flight that you take on Vistara, you get a questionnaire to say, how was your flight? Is there things that we can do to improve? More so in today's times, when we also want to understand from the customer, how was the safety, how was the hygiene on the flight, so we can also learn. So that is one. Definitely the feedback loop, which was mentioned, is very important. The second one is any product, service, or anything that we want to introduce. We do have a rigorous customer engagement team and a team that essentially champions this as the internal customer, to put ourselves in the shoes of the customer to say, look, what is the impact to the customer from this? what is going to be the possible, pitfalls, or what are going to be the possible advantages to the customer. So we try and do this for every product or every change that we're going to make within the organization. So centrally, the customer does come into this quite a bit from Vistara's perspective. To just go back to how things have changed, I mean, especially in the recent times with COVID, I think it's absolutely right what Puneet said. There's more migration towards digital. To give you a very simple example, before the whole lockdown situation, the number of people who checked in online, meaning to do a web check-in on our flights, was about 20 to 30%. Now it's almost 90 to 95%. So it means that obviously people are doing this partly because of requirements, partly because of choice. The other aspect, which is also very fair, which has changed, is during the time of the crisis. I mean, when it hit and when there was a lockdown and the government said you can't do travel anymore, there was actually an increase in requirement for face-to-face or voice interaction. There was no reduction. I mean, like, if the world was all going towards digital, you would expect customers to go on the website and read the T's and C's or the conditions that we have. But what we found is exactly like what Puneet said. We had a surge because people wanted to speak to someone else, because they wanted to be reassured. They wanted to be told what they need to do because there was so much confusion around it. And thankfully for us, the last point I want to make is that as part of what we're doing for customers, it starts internally. So every time we hire any customer-facing staff or a frontliner, we try and make sure that this person is the right person for the job. So the reason I say this is because when our call centers were running, running at almost 80-90% occupancy, we could activate people like our cabin services. We could activate people from our HR team. We could activate people from our sales team to activate them to say, look, for some of the queries, because our call center is so inundated by calls, can you guys help us? And that helped out. I mean, that ethos and that customer centricity has to be there across the organization.
No, great, wonderful. And I'll bear testimony to your focus on customer experience because, like you said, your experience is not delivered through a smartphone. It's delivered through the experience of getting on the plane, in the plane, and off the plane. And I just like the way your people, your ground staff, treat passengers like almost human, which other airlines kind of forget. It's just X amount of bodies to be shoved on to Y amount of seats and then off-boarded. So, and I find this pleasant human touch in Vistara, which I personally really enjoy. But, sorry, there must have been huge stresses, both to Puneet and to you, Vinod, on the backends, on retooling and rejigging your backends, your processes, your SOPs. Because of the changing expectations, the changing times. And therefore, my question then is this change a mild acceleration in an overall trend? How do you see the next few years unfolding in both of your industries? And what does it mean to you at your back end and your own philosophy on customer experience delivery? Maybe Vinod, you can go first and then Puneet catches up.
Sure. Let me split it into two horizons. One is the entire COVID and maybe just out of COVID, maybe the next 6 to 12 months. The expectation, the requirements, and the thinking of the customer is going to be slightly different. So yes, digital is going to be important, will continue to be important. I think that's something that we have learned. And I think internally in our discussions, we have come to realize that whatever we've done so far in our digital journey is not going to be enough, because the customer is now used to even buying his onions through Amazon or through websites rather than going to the market. So obviously his expectation and his comparison is now no longer going to be comparing me as a website to another airline website, but to the Ubers and the Amazons of the world. So I think that is an important distinction which has happened, and that's just the reality. I mean, whether you like it or not, that is something that we are working around at Vistara. We are trying to review and rejig all the different services that we offer, whether it's through the digital website, whether it's through the mobile, or through any other interface. So I think that will change for a fact, and that is probably going to be a more long-term thing as well. Whether it's going to be just during COVID or beyond, I think that will continue. The other aspect which is very important and top of mind in the next 6 to 12 months is going to be this whole hygiene and safety, at least when it comes to an airline and a face-to-face interaction. customers are going to keep that right at the top of their minds. Safety, of course, has always been important for an airline, but I think the health and hygiene elements are additional aspects which the customer is going to think through. In fact, we've done surveys just after we restarted our flights, and over 50% of the people have basically said the biggest stress or worry is the fear of getting infected during transit, and not just themselves, but very down-to-earth reality that came out is, look, as an airline, you can do anything you want, but I'm worried about the guy next to me. Is he going to follow the rules? Is he going to put on his mask? Is he going to wear his shield? Is he going to keep quiet and not walk around? So these are practical realities for the next 6 to 12 months, and that is not going to change. So for us, I think from a customer experience perspective, the biggest solution that we have come out with is communication. So we communicate to customers, we tell them this is what you should be doing, this is what we are doing, and we ran a whole campaign saying, let's make flying feel safe again. To tell customers, look, you can do your part and you have to do your part, because otherwise this whole situation falls apart. So that's, I think, going to be top of mind for the next near future. Beyond that, I think there will be 2 or 3 aspects which will come up very important to customers. One is flexibility. So now that we've gone through this whole crisis and we're still going through it, the customers are going to, be anchored to it. So when there's always going to be this situation of, look, if something happens, can I change my flights? Can I make changes to it? Can I do something which is probably not something that they would have thought about in the last 6 months before the crisis? So that flexibility and giving the customer more power, I think that's important. The second aspect, which is very important, is self-help and self-reliance. So as much as I talked about the call center, as much as I spoke about the staff all chipping in, what has come out very strongly is that customers want to be in control and do things on their own. Very simple things, like if I want to add a meal, I want to add a baggage, or I want to change my flight. Rather than calling someone or coming to the airline or the airport to do it, can I do it digitally? Because as I said, you can do this digitally on Amazon, you can do this digitally on the other websites, so why not the airline? I think that's something that that is going to happen. And last but not the least, internally within Vistara and for the employees and the entire corporate support team, I think the mindset also has to change to recognize that these 2 things are going to be for the long term, and we, as providing a service to customers, have to orient ourselves through this. Whether it's processes, like you said, whether it's technology, or very simply, it's just priorities. So what should we put our money on? Should it be on X or Y? These are the 2 lenses that we should look through for that.
Great, thanks. Puneet?
Yeah, what I very quickly recall are 2 changes in behaviors which were not easy to come by earlier in the pre-COVID phase. One is what we have seen in the banking industry. Most of our business customers were typically used to doing their banking through the support of their office staff or bearers who they would send to the bank branches with physical instructions to be processed and executed. In the post-COVID phase, there has been a stark change in the behavior and attitude of this segment of customers, where they have taken effort to understand how they can enable themselves sitting at their home and offices to process those basic banking transactions that they were otherwise wanting the bank to process on their behalf. This is both an opportunity, because you could now clearly build on this shift in behavior and create more and more capabilities and value adds to enable the business customers to really do their banking on their own. And obviously, it's also getting duly supported by lots of regulatory and positive-looking regulatory changes which are coming in, whether it's in the form of e-sign, whether it's in the form of capability for video KYC, etc. So that's giving you all that kind of an opportunity, and there will be decisive changes, at least on these parameters. The second interesting incident is you still had lots of a fairly large percentage of customers who were very keen in getting their statements in the physical format on a monthly basis. Now, through the first 3 months of COVID, April, May, June, there were no logistics company working. There were not, even post offices were constrained. Banks were still obligated to send statements. So what did we do? We shifted the whole needle and reached out the statements in a digital form to this entire set of customers, and it has been readily accepted. Yeah, there hasn't been any pushback that no, I still need my physical statement. So that gives an opportunity of a different kind, which is that the awareness and acceptance for consuming information in a non-physical format. Can we say there is a decisive shift? Probably. As things open up a little more over the next 2-3 quarters, and if this set of customers do not come back and seek a physical interface again, then you know that it's a change for the good and for a more simplified kind of a workflow. Then comes the whole concept of work from home. Now it's got embraced in different measures at different levels. It may also bring with it in its wake maybe flexi time kind of capabilities. How does one align to be available at flexi hours? How have we managed to enable our staff to continue to deliver the required service even when they are at a WFH model? So what kind of technology enablement did we do? What kind of process revamping did we do so that the equilibrium of service and controls, convenience and controls doesn't get compromised, but still the end purpose is serviced? And one more illustration which readily comes to mind is, and with this whole shift and the, somewhere the overweight on contactless and remote, etc., a bank account is typically identified with a checkbook and a debit card. Yeah, and that's very close to a consumer's heart. Now, during this period and with all the fear factor, contactless kind of emerged as one of the prominent features. And we experimented with something called a smart locker. Yeah, so you are sending the deliverables instead of to the address, but into a destination where we have a smart locker, and you send a OTP code to the customer, and then he at his convenience can go and collect his stuff. Yeah, so again, that serves multiple purposes. So in short, do we see decisive changes coming in? Answer is yes.
Yeah, great, wonderful. And I love the innovation that you're both attempting to bring into your service delivery. So I had a couple of follow-up questions from my side. So oftentimes the desire to put a certain amount of power into the hands of the customer or self-service, as we call it, is driven by also a desire to optimize the cost profile so that you can reduce the cost burden on you and perhaps then deliver a heightened experience elsewhere. So do you see any change in trends there? Because with more and more things shifting to digital, are there any other things that you would choose to emphasize? Because digital is, as Vinod, I think, clearly mentioned, quite a democratic medium in the sense that you are now competing with not only the Amazons and Flipkarts, but also the small mom and pop websites who might have such a slick interface that you would feel like a clunky dinosaur with your more professional setup. The world in the digital realm is so open and democratic and egalitarian. So at one point is the desire to give more and more power to the hands of the customer, and then that leads to everything becoming a homogeneous shade of gray. So where does your customer experience differentiation come from? And going forward, how are you going to be able to differentiate your experience? So Puneet first, then Vinod.
Sure. So it's not just all digital. As I said, you will distinguish yourself as a good service provider if you are able to clearly understand customer's preference for how he wants to connect with you and how he wants to get service. Yeah. When we look at, for example, cash consumption today, we had dipped to about 20% levels in April, early May of the Jan-Feb run rates in terms of cash consumption and cash transactions, either via ATM or via branches. In the first fortnight of September, those levels are back to about 80% of Jan-Feb volume. Now, therefore, is customer giving up the need fulfillment that he typically does via cash as a payment medium? Answer is no. How do you make that experience better and superior? So today, there is enough and more investment being done in ATM as a technology and in and scaling it up to be an intelligent device instead of just a dumb device which only dispenses cash. One part. We had invested in bots, artificial intelligence, both from a voice interface point of view and from a chat interface point of view. As we went through the whole, crisis management during the COVID phase and continuing, we realized that there's an opportunity to really bring a lot more intelligence and a lot more use cases, both in the voice bot and in the chat bot, to give that flexibility and superior experience to the customer. So there is that, investment which is getting redirected towards channels which the customers are picking as a channel of choice to get serviced. So it's not about, trying to create a space for yourself in clutter and everything else that the ecosystem or the competition is providing. It's also very unique to how your franchise is reaching out to you. What are they putting as an expectation? And are you able to read it correctly, preempt it, and respond to it? So that's the journey as we see going forward.
So co-creation is the strategy you're choosing, Puneet.
Absolutely.
Vinod, how about you?
Yeah, so Anupam, I see this as a upskilling more than anything else. So when I say upskilling, a very simple example is we do have call center agents who are at this point in time perhaps handling very routine calls. Even simple things like what's my baggage allowance, even simple things like what is the time of your flight. So unfortunately, there are still these things which we do get where you would think that many of this information is readily available through multiple channels, whether it's the website, mobile, and so on. So what I see as self-help by doing these things, whether it's through a chatbot or whether it's through other means, is giving these same number of agents the opportunity to handle something that's a bit more complicated. So what I can give you again as an example is we are doing some of this self-help and trying to move more power in the hands of the customers, and thereby we've actually now set up a dedicated call center for our platinum and gold members, because we know that these people probably need a little bit more hand-holding. These people need a bit more care and support, very simply because of the problems that they face in some times, which are very different from your normal customer, because these might be people who travel very often, and therefore as the frequency increases, the kind of situations they face or the kind of issues they face also are very different and probably can't be handled by someone who's more junior or someone who's a bit less skilled. So that upskilling is taking place so that I can focus more on the areas that needs this particular assistance. So that's one part. The second part, in terms of how this whole issue of self-help is going to change things, I think, look, we have to be cognizant that the customer of today ultimately is the person who decides. It is the customer's choice whether he wants to contact you by phone, whether he wants to come to your website, whether he wants to chat with you on a chatbot, or whether he wants to come to your office at the airport. Of course, the chances and the probability and the number of customers who interact change across each of these media. But the fundamental point I'm making is that you need to be prepared to entertain the customer regardless of where how he interacts, and more importantly, have the correct and consistent reply or mechanism to reply. Because you don't want a situation where a customer says, look, I called your call center, they told me the flight is at 6. Now on the website, I see it's 4. And if I went to the airport, they say it's at 8. So I think that particular loop and that mechanism of making sure that everything is unified in one place is the big challenge for an airline, at least, because the airline journey has multiple touch points. I mean, from the time you think you want to fly, to the time you book, to the time you actually fly, and the time you get your baggage and your, God forbid, there's no loss of baggage, but if there is an incident, that whole process can take up to a year. And this whole journey has to be left to the consumer to decide which mechanism or which channel does he want to use for each of those particular interactions.
Interesting. Such a big difference. And we loosely call it the service industry. I mean, and there are so many unique facets. It's been lovely getting your insights, Puneet and Vinod. Ivan, if there are questions, we'd be happy to take them. Else, it's over to you.
And thank you, Anupam, for moderating this panel very well. We wish you and your respective organizations all the very best going forward.
Thank you. Good day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.
You too.